Welcome to the Stepmom Side with Alicia Crasco, the podcast for stepmoms ready to create the life they want and one they actually have a say in. Here we talk all things stepmom life and just a little bit more. Leave the superficial conversations at the door and get ready for perspective shifts and actionable advice to help you on your way to creating the life you want, one step at a time. Hey, welcome back to this week's podcast episode. This week, as you saw by the title, something different, we are going to be talking about apologizing to kids. That sounds really weird. And if you were brought up like me, I haven't really talked about this a whole lot, like my upbringing, but my parents were divorced. My mom obviously was a single mom, always worked, we had babysitters. I've got a sister that is 7.5 months older than me, so she's an Irish twin, or I'm an Irish twin, and then I've got a younger sister who's like almost 6 years younger than me. But I was raised in a house where my mom never apologized, ever. She was like the kind of mom that it was like my way or the highway, and if I said jump, you said how high. Like that is the response that she was looking for. And if she snapped her fingers, whatever it was that she needed done or we were supposed to be doing, needed to be done then. So growing up, that's kind of like the person that I became, like my way or the highway. Definitely has played out in relationships. If you've been here a minute, like you know that that's something that I struggled with at the beginning of my marriage. It took me a while to learn how to like undo that, or how to unlearn that. But then I also parented my stepkids like that. Not something that I'm super proud of. But I parented like that in my early years as a stepmom, which explains why things were so hard, right? Like, how can I come in as a stepmom and, you know, expect to snap my fingers or expect to have this authoritarian parenting style when I'm not even their mom? Like, I'm just the stepmom, right? And I've talked about that too, being just the stepmom. But it's the hardest thing to unlearn. Like the whole do as I say, not as I do, or, you know, I grew up with children are to be seen and not heard. I was painfully shy as a kid, so it's like hilarious to me that I have a podcast and like you actually listen to it, which is great. And by the way, if you do listen to it, obviously because you're here, can you please go leave a rating and a review? I don't care what you say. It could be about something like specific. It could be like, hey, you know what, listening to this podcast, I've learned this, or Alicia's helped me navigate this, or whatever it is. Can you please leave a rating and a review? Like, I really appreciate that. I do read them, and I update my website with new podcast ratings or reviews on there. So please leave a rating and review. Thank you so much. And if you sent them to me on Instagram, awesome. Thank you so much. But can you actually leave them on like iTunes or Apple and like leave the review there? I would greatly appreciate that. But yeah, so I used to be painfully shy as a kid, like so painfully shy, unbelievably painfully shy. Literally like didn't talk. And my older sister like talked all of the time. Anyway, so back to like the point of the story. Thanks for the tangent there. So yeah, my mom never apologized. And even as an adult, I don't think that I've ever heard her apologize. That's not true. Maybe like a handful of times, but it's like very far and very few in between. And so saying I'm sorry I learned was a sign of weakness, was a sign of you are wrong, and we don't ever get to be wrong. We always have to be right? And so it was like the perfect combination, the perfect storm for me to be a stepmom, like authoritarian parenting style. I was never wrong. I never said I'm sorry. I was walking into being a stepmom like with the best intentions, and it all like blew up in my face. So something that I've learned to do is say I'm sorry to my husband. I've learned to say I'm sorry to my stepkids. I've learned to say I'm sorry to my daughter. But at first, the very first time that I said I'm sorry to one of my stepkids, I was freaking out about it, like mentally freaking out about it. Like, oh my God, if I say I'm sorry to them, they're going to think she's an idiot. She doesn't know anything. All of these things. And I thought the world was going to crash and everything was going to come tumbling down. And there was just going to be this massive, like, I knew it. She's a fake. You know, she's a fraud. She's an imposter. Like all of these things. I felt like there was so much riding on me even contemplating saying that I'm sorry. This sounds so ridiculous. I know. Like Now it sounds so ridiculous. But in my early years, I was like, I can't say I'm sorry, because if I say I'm sorry, then that means that I don't actually know everything, or I don't have it all figured out, or, my ego was driving the bus, and all of the things. I'm sure that you can relate. But the very first time I said I'm sorry, I thought I was going to throw up. I thought I was going to puke. I don't even remember what it was about, because I was so freaked out that I was actually even going to do it. But I knew that I was wrong, right? And I have like this really strong moral compass of like, okay, right is right and wrong is wrong. Also, did not set me up for success as a stepmom. Something I really struggled with, like right is right and wrong is wrong, and black is black and white is white, and there's no gray area. That didn't go very well. But I've learned how to work in the gray areas. I'm better. I feel like there's like this massive lead up to like I'm saying I'm sorry. So I say I'm sorry, and nothing happened. Like the world didn't crash. No one thought that I was crazy. No one was like, oh my gosh, you're an imposter. Like, you don't know what you're talking about. If anything, that humility to say I'm sorry or I was wrong helped. It helped the situation, right? I went from being like this dictator to like, oh, this person that actually has a heart and actually cares about me. So if you find yourself in a situation with your stepkids where maybe you've said the wrong thing or maybe you've done the wrong thing, go back and say I'm sorry. Not maybe like years later, but maybe like half an hour later, an hour later, the next day when you've like calmed down and everyone is like had time to process like what happened. Go back and just say, hey, you know what, man, that's how I talk to my stepkids, like, hey, man, or like, hey, like, depending on, my stepdaughter, I don't say, hey, man, to her. I might, but like, I probably don't. But to my stepson, like, I talk to him like, hey, man, sorry. And it's more like a joking conversation, where with my stepdaughter, I could try to be a little more serious, depending on, of course, the situation that I'm apologizing for. But just go back like, hey, I'm really sorry. Yesterday, I blew my top because I was feeling da-da-da-da-da. I know that wasn't okay. I'm really sorry. Right? But then also know that an apology without change is manipulation. Not saying that you have to be perfect 100% of the time, but you can just go back and say I'm sorry. And it's not going to be the end of the world. No one's going to think that you're a fake. No one's going to think that you're a fraud. No one's going to think that you're a crazy person. There's a lot of humility to just go back and say I'm sorry. So I learned how to do that with my stepkids, which in turn has made it really easy with my daughter to just say I'm sorry. Like it's easier for me to lose my cool with her because she's mine, and I don't feel like this crazy amount of pressure to be perfect 100% of the time. But I can go back and say, hey, you know what, I'm really sorry that I yelled, or I flipped out like a crazy person. Like I'll say something like silly like that to her. I'm really sorry about that. Going forward, here's what I'm going to do differently, right? Because there's accountability, there's actions to be taken, there's different things to do. But yes, apologizing to kids, can we please normalize that? Because, like I said, I grew up never hearing an apology, so it was really hard for me to do it, where my daughter hears me say it to her or my husband, and it's totally normal for her. So the next time you're struggling, or, you do struggle in a situation with your stepkids, it's okay to struggle. It's okay to, lose your cool. It's okay to all of the things. But make sure if you have that rupture that you go back and also repair and just say, hey, I'm sorry that this happened. That's it for this week. It's kind of like a short and sweet one, but I will chat with you next week. Thanks for taking time to listen to this week's episode. If anything was helpful or resonated with you, please share it on social media and tag me. I'm just at Alicia Crosco. And if you could leave a 5-star rating and review while you're at it, that would also be really helpful. And if you find yourself struggling with your stepmom journey and you want a little bit more support without the hefty price tag of coaching, you might want to check out the Stepmom Side community, which is my own private community for stepmoms, where you get to connect with other stepmoms around the world and myself, where I hold weekly office hours and monthly group coaching. It's kind of like you have your own personal coach in your own back pocket. Again, without that hefty price tag. See you next week.